Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Different Brains speaker series installment for June, Defeating Self-Defeat with Dr. Mark Goulston. My name is Ali Idris, and I'm an intern at Different Brains, and I want to thank everyone for attending. We will start in just a minute, but first I want to share some information about Different Brains. Different Brains is a nonprofit organization that strives to encourage understanding and acceptance of individuals who have variation in brain function and social behaviorals known as neurodiversity. Our mission has three pillars. One, to mentor neurodiverse adults and maximize their potential for employment and independence. Two, to increase awareness of neurodiversity by producing interactive media. Three, to foster a new generation of neurodivergent self-advocates. Here at Different Brains, we promote awareness through the production of a variety of neurodiverse media content, including our multiple web series, blogs, podcasts, movies, and documentaries, all available for free at differentbrains.org. All of our content is worked on by those in the mentorship program, including myself, through which we aid individuals in taking the first step towards achieving their goals, finding their voice, expanding their social skills, and understanding of the professional world. Additionally, we have begun facilitating research projects to better understand the ways people can maximize their potential. To find more information or to make a tax-deductible donation, please visit our website at differentbrains.org. Now on to our program for the night. I want to invite everyone to send questions using the Q&A feature in Zoom, which we'll have a Q&A later, or by putting questions in the chat box. Now, let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Mark Goulston.
So thank you for coming to this webinar. Let me tell you a little bit about what it's about. I'm the author or co-author of 9 books, and my very first book was called Get Out of Your Own Way. It looks like this, and you can find it at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And one of the reasons I wrote it is because I figured out that there's a difference between calamities and tragedies. A calamity is a calamity because it's unavoidable. A flood, a fire, COVID, and it seems unavoidable. I mean, we can learn from it and try and prevent it, but a tragedy is a tragedy because it seems like it could have been avoided. And one of the greatest personal tragedies in our life is getting to the end of our life when we don't have much time and thinking it could have been much better. It could have been much better if I didn't get in my own way, if I didn't give in to self-defeating behaviors. And what I could have avoided, I failed to prevent because I couldn't get out of my own way. So here's a series, here are some of those self-defeating behaviors. And coinciding with this, there's an audio course. It's actually my first course. It's at himalaya.com/defeat. And at the end of this, I'll show you a QR code, and you can just capture that in your camera, and it'll take you to a blog that explains the course and how to access it and how to access it for free. But as I read these, can you think of someone who may suffer from any of these things? Do you know anybody who procrastinates? Do you know anybody who takes things too personally? People who don't learn from their mistakes? People who quit too soon? People who try to change others? People who hold on to grudges? People who think I'm sorry is enough to make up for having hurt someone? Do you know anyone who talks too much? Know anyone who feels sorry for themselves too much? How about people who make a bad situation worse? Or what about taking no for an answer when we shouldn't, or not taking no for an answer when we should? Or what about just letting fear run your life? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an education about how our personality forms and how, because of that, it leads to self-defeating behaviors. So in this slide, I'm hoping you can all see it. This is actually a picture of how our personality develops. If you look at below the slide, you'll see that all through life, we're stepping into the unknown. We go from birth to our first breath, We go from awake to sleeping through the night, all these stages, and it picks up all the way to the end, college to career and marriage and adult life, and then the end of our life. And picture this in your mind's eye, that every time we step out into the unknown, we get nervous, and we get scared. Or if we hit a home run, we want to look back at our parents, who hopefully may be watching us. And rapprochement is a French term, and it means looking back. So picture this: all through life, we step into the unknown. And when we step into the unknown, we have what's called separation anxiety. And what does that mean? It feels that when we're in the unknown, we're going to get anxious, we're going to get panicky, we're going to freak out. And that's when we look back. That's what rapprochement is. And depending on what we see when we look back, we take that inside and we internalize it. And then what happens is, after we internalize that and we start to get into our early teens, you've probably heard of the term separation anxiety, but you may not have heard of the term individuation anxiety. So as I mentioned, separation anxiety is how we feel when we step into the unknown. But if you're a teenager, imagine that you're kind of in the unknown, and the next step is to step into adulthood. But if you feel that you can't make it into adulthood because you feel too confused, you don't know what you want to do, you don't know what to major in, when you go to college, you're lost. Also, individuation anxiety is something that a lot of young girls, and for that matter, young boys with eating disorders have. If you think of anyone you know, or people who are listening in that might have an eating disorder, and if you are listening in, would love to take your questions when we get to that part of the program. But individuation anxiety means, okay, I'm separate from my parents, but geez, I don't know how to make it into adulthood. I'm really nervous. I'm in the middle of puberty and I'm getting all these sexual hormones running around, and boys are looking at me or girls are looking at me, and I'm all sort of messed up. And so what happens with people with eating disorders is they grab onto something that they can focus on and control. And something they grab onto is food. Food is something that we've been grabbing onto even while we were in our mom's womb, and also exercising. And so it feels like, as long as I'm able to exercise and control my food and my weight, it's a way of distracting me from the fact that I'm just scared that I can't make it into adulthood. Now I'm going to share the next slide. When I share this, especially with parents, I tend to set it up this way, because the next slide is one of the ugliest slides you're ever going to see. But when parents are looking in, I make this bold challenge that it's going to go, I believe, from ugly to something you're going to want to keep a copy of all of your life, because it may explain a lot of your life to you. And we will certainly make those available to you after the presentation, so you can have copies of it. So again, this slide is about looking back when you step into the unknown. And when you look back, you can receive this from your parents. I told you it was ugly. So if you look at the 4 columns, you'll see coddling, negative, absent, loving, TMC, which stands for teacher, mentor, coach. And what does this mean? You step into the unknown and you look back, and if you have parents who coddle you, who make it all better for you, who bail you out of all situations so that you never learn how to deal with them, what happens is you grow up expecting to be bailed out of situations. And then as you start to go through your adolescence, you're so used to being bailed out of your upset. Sometimes you can turn into that teenager who tells your parents, write my college essay, do this for me. And then sometimes what happens is you are kind of spoiled because you never learn to sort of deal with life on your own. And if you think of what a compulsion is, compulsive eating, compulsive drinking, compulsive anything, what they all have in common is a compulsion distracts us from a bad mood. Geez, if I drink a little bit or maybe a lot, I don't feel as bad. Gee, if I procrastinate and I put something off, oh, I feel better than I felt when I felt that lingering over me. Now, the problem with self-defeating behaviors is we use all of them to make us feel better for the moment, but if we give in to them, we fall behind everyone. And what we receive from our parents is usually a combination of all of these. But you can see that if you're purely coddled and spoiled by your parents, so you never deal with life, you can see how when you run into adult problems or what we call adult obstacles, you have compulsive behavior. And then by the time you get to your adult life, it can be lost. You can be someone who can't ever support yourself. And at the end of your life, it can sometimes feel as if, did I waste my life? Now let's go to the next, it's not a column, the next, I'm blocking on that. Maybe I'm having a little self-defeating behavior. The next row. So what if you look back and you step in the unknown and something upsets you, but instead of being coddled, you get criticized? People tell you it's your own fault and you're feeling hurt or scared and they criticize you. So what happens is you feel hurt, but underneath the hurt, you're angry. And when you become an adolescent, you don't even want to talk to your parents. And you want to say to them instead, leave me alone. And as you get older, you're kind of hostile. You're belligerent. And then when you run into an obstacle as an adult, what do? You blame others because you were blamed. And then if you get too much of that, by the time you reach your adult life, what's the end point of blaming and being angry is you end up bitter. And many of us know a relative or a friend who's bitter, and we just don't want to be around them. Now, what about the third row? You run into an obstacle and then there's nobody there and you're all on your own. And so you get scared. And so what happens is you tend to not take chances, because if you take chances and you fall on your face, no one's there to help you. And so you don't take chances and you begin to have this scared attitude about life. And you start to think nothing will ever work. And you start to have this defeatist attitude. You run into a problem as an adult and you just pull away. You don't show up for work for a week. What happened to John? What happened to Nancy? I don't know. Well, you ran into an obstacle, and because you internalized that, you didn't deal with it. And at the end of your life, you feel empty because you didn't take chances. And then the fourth row is different. That's what happens when you look back and you have what we call a loving teacher, mentor, coach. Now, I'm sure people listening may not remember this because it happened in 1997, but you may remember the person it happened to. His name is Tiger Woods. And we know he's run into some difficulty and a lot of physical injuries in the past 10 years or so. But in 1997, Tiger Woods was playing in his first Masters tournament. That's one of the majors. And on the front nine of the Masters tournament, he shot 40. If you know anything about golf and you're a pro, 40 is not a good score for 9 holes. It's either 3 or 4 over par. So what does he do? He goes to his father, Earl Woods. And up to that time, Earl and Tiger were not only father and son, they were best friends. And Earl was a loving teacher, mentor, coach. So Tiger doesn't have to turn inside for whatever he's internalized because that person is still there. So he goes to his father, Earl, and he says, I don't know what's happening. I can't play. Nothing's working right. But because Earl had been that teacher, mentor, coach, Earl just let him talk, listen to him. That was the loving part. And he looked back and he said, Tiger, you've been here hundreds of times before. Do what you need to do. Tiger looked at Earl. Earl listened to him. Tiger listened to Earl, took a deep breath, went back on the course and shot 18 under par. And if you add 18 under par to the 40 he shot on the front nine, that means he shot like 22 or 23 under par. And that record has never been equaled until this year. So 1997 to 2021, it stood for 24 years because he got to internalize that. And what happens is when you can internalize that, you run into an obstacle. And see, often an obstacle makes you feel, I can't push forward. I can't push forward. So you turn inward into what you were raised with. And if you turn inward and you come up with being spoiled and there's no one there spoiling you, you'll reach for a self-defeating behavior, which makes you feel better for the moment. But then it takes away from your dealing with things. And if you reach in and what you come up is with criticism, then you just get angry and you find a way to blame people when you run into an obstacle. And then when you reach inside and you come up with nothing, as we said before, you run away, you go and hide. Or if you reach inside and you come up with what was a loving teacher, mentor, coach, you come up with a feeling that you can get through it. Now, my parents, I miss them. They've both been dead and gone for a while. But my father was a little bit on the critical side. I think he meant well. And I think part of it is he wanted to be a good provider and he was always worried. But his way of being worried was to be somewhat critical. And so if I was worried about something, if I was afraid, if I did something wrong, there was a little bit of a combination of either that negativity or just feeling all alone with it. And so I think I grew up with a combination. In spite of that, I was able to sort of make my way into medical school. But then what happened is when I was out in medical school, because of how rigorous it was, how tough it was, and Hackey knows about this because we were classmates in medical school. What happened is I got depressed. And I got so depressed that I dropped out of medical school. I took a leave of absence and I went and worked in just simple jobs. I just wanted to give my brain a rest because I was highlighting all the books. All my books were in yellow and I was hoping I could hold on to it, but I couldn't. But I went out and I just did regular jobs where I could give my brain a rest. I came back and I was good for about 3 months, and then the depression came back. And see, when I was running into an obstacle and I reached inside, I didn't have anything to really support me. So the second time the depression came back, I sought to take another, what's called a leave of absence, which means miraculously I wasn't failing, so I could take time off. But what I didn't know is that every time someone takes time off, the medical school loses money. The tuition that a medical student pays is not enough to cover all the expenses of educating a medical student. So the second time I asked for a leave of absence, I met with the head of the school who really cared about financing the school. And I don't even remember meeting with him, but I got a call from the dean of students who Hackey and I both know, both remember, both missed, both loved. And the dean of students cared more about students. And I think the head of the school was worried that if they asked me to withdraw, which is a nice way of kicking me out, that I might do something self-destructive. And I may very well have. And so I go and meet with the dean of students. and I didn't have an Earl Woods. And he shared with me a letter that he got from the dean of the school, which basically said that the head of the school had met with me and was suggesting that I try some other profession. And he was going to recommend to the promotions committee that oversaw promotions and leaves of absence, he was going to recommend to them that they ask me to withdraw. And when I asked the dean of students, what does this mean? And his name was Dean William McNary. He said, Mark, you've been kicked out. And what happened is I actually think a miracle happened. Because when he said that, it was almost as if I was just punched in the stomach and I just kind of caved. And I felt lost. And I will tell you, if he said to me, if I can help you, give me a call, I would have gone back to where I was staying. And there's a good chance I wouldn't have given him a call. Maybe I was too proud. Maybe I was too ashamed. And there's a possible chance that I wouldn't be here today. But he didn't do that. What he said to me, so imagine you're someone who feels that you're only worth what you can produce in life and you can no longer produce anything. So imagine someone saying to you, Mark, you didn't mess up because you're passing everything, but you are messed up. But if you got unmessed up, I think the school would be glad they gave you a second chance. And so when he said that to me, I'm just remembering it right now. My eyes just teared up because I didn't know what he was doing. And that was the loving part of him. And then he said, Mark, even if you don't get unmessed up, even if you don't become a doctor, even if you don't do anything with the rest of your life, I'd be proud to know you. And at that point, I am just sobbing. And then he said something to me which changed the course of my life. And he said, Mark, I'd be proud to know you because you have a bunch of goodness in you that the world needs, and we should grade it in medical school, but we really don't. And you don't know how much the world needs that goodness that you have. And you won't know it till you're 35, but you have to make it till you're 35. And I looked down because I couldn't believe someone saw a future for me. Someone saw something that was worthwhile in me. I couldn't believe it. And then he said, you look at me. And I looked at him and he said, you deserve to be on this planet and you're going to let me help you. And I can remember like it happened yesterday. And I remember looking down and I raised my hand and I said, I think I'd like that. And then he arranged an appeal and I was able to make my case. And for some reason or other, the people in the promotions committee, I guess they saw some of this goodness. I didn't see it. So I took another year off and I went and I worked at a famous psychiatric foundation called the Menninger Foundation. It's still around. It's in Texas now, but it used to be in Topeka, Kansas. And I actually found that I could connect with people with schizophrenia, farm boys. I grew up in a suburb of Boston. I didn't know anything about farms, but I found that I was able to connect with some of these people. And then I finished that year knowing what I was going to do. I came back to medical school, finished medical school, and then I went and trained in psychiatry. And so if you look at the bottom of this chart, what it says can't be changed. And what that meant to me is that as long as I was living under the direct influence of my family, and I wasn't getting enough of the loving teacher, mentor, coach, and I've made peace with that because I know inside both my parents were loving, but because they didn't receive enough of the loving teacher, mentor, coach, they had trouble giving it. But it can be changed because I am evidence of it. And so Dean McNary was my first mentor. And, and I think a mentor can sometimes be that person who can be that parent or give you some of those things that your parents never gave you, maybe because no one gave it to them. And I've had 8 mentors since then. The last one was Larry King. You may remember him from CNN. And I went to breakfast with him every day for 2 years before COVID. And then before him, I was mentored by someone you probably don't know, but people out in the corporate world and people in the leadership field know of him. His name was Warren Bennis. And what happens is I internalized the loving teacher, mentor, coach of all of them. And so I want you to imagine something. If you've ever walked through a forest and you've seen cut trees, you'll see the rings of a tree, and every ring is a year. And those rings tell you the history of the tree. Now, if you look at the tree on the left, that's a tree that was traumatized. It wasn't solid at the beginning. How it made it through is probably a miracle. But what those inner rings show is that tree was traumatized, who knows, by fire, by flood, but somehow it made it through, but it still doesn't feel like it has a solid core. So it's made it through life and it kept going, but way down deep, it's still not as solid as the tree on the right. But what happened with Dean McNary, and I'm going to give you something that I would like you to create. And this is called the De-Stress Exercise and Journal. During COVID, I wrote 2 books, and one of them is called, I'll get it for you, or maybe one of the books is called Why Cope When You Can Heal. And I wrote it with this wonderful woman named Diana Handel, which led a hospital through a double murder-suicide by an employee of the month. And in that book, I introduced the De-Stress Exercise and Journal, and that is Dean McNary on the left side of the screen. That's the Dean of Students. And what I'd like you to do so that you can build yourself from the inside out is get yourself a journal. Get yourself a small journal and paste a picture on the inside cover of someone who cares about you, someone who believes in you when you don't believe in yourself, someone who sees a future when you don't see a future. And then what happens is every time you run into a roadblock, imagine that person talking you through it. Now you might say, I don't have anyone like that. Well, if you're a young teenager, you could borrow LeBron James or Steph Curry or another hero. It really doesn't matter, but they would say the same thing to you. And imagine you run into a problem, and instead of reacting with a self-defeating behavior, what I do is I imagine Dean McNary saying, you can do this, Mark. Write down the date and time of what just happened. And then I write down as if I'm talking to him, and he's asking me what just happened. And I do a lot of podcasts, and I tend to go off on tangents. I'm staying pretty organized for this, so I don't have to reach out to him. But sometimes he'll say, what just happened? Oh, I was in a podcast. I started telling a story. I couldn't finish it. I said there were 5 points to remember, and I only got to 3 of them. And then I imagine him saying, what did you think when that happened? Dean McNary, I'm so unpolished. I don't know why I even do this. And then I imagine him saying, what did you feel when it happened? I felt embarrassed. I've done all these sort of interviews. I should be more professional. And then I imagine him saying, and this is the most important thing, what does it make you want to do now? And what I might write down is makes me feel like quitting, makes me feel like not doing it anymore. I don't seem to be able to get it right. And then I imagine him saying to me, Mark, you know I love you. Take a deep breath. Then I imagine him saying, what would be a better thing to do? and then I'll just share this because this is what's happening. I'd say, well, I probably shouldn't run away because after the interview, the host said, "You were great. We want to have you back." So apparently not finishing stories or finishing the 5 steps. I'm amazed that I got through all 6 of these. And so I imagine him saying to me, why that? Why would that be a better thing to do? Because instead of running away, I realized that I can handle it. And see, when you do that, this is what happened with all my mentors, is I've internalized them. And so now I am the tree on the left. So when something happens to me and I reach inside, I don't come up with negativity. I don't come up with feeling alone. Instead, what happens is I think of, for me, since they're all dead mentors, I think of what they were in my life. I appreciate them. I'm grateful to them. I sometimes reach out to the families of all these mentors and say, I think your dad, your grandpa, you may not know this, but I think he might have saved my life if I go back to Dean McNary. And then I'm just filled with gratitude and missing Dean McNary. And so because we want to be able to get some questions, we'll end with this. And if you scan with your camera that QR code, it will take you to a blog on my website that talks about this course, Defeating Self-Defeat. And it'll tell you a little bit more about how I view self-defeating behavior. And if you go to the site, himalaya.com/defeat, and you put in defeat in the promo code, you'll be able to hear the entire course. And the entire course covers all of those 12 self-defeating behaviors that we mentioned at the beginning. So I think in the interest of time, and hopefully people have questions, I'd love to take some of them now, and maybe we can do that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goulston. Everyone, you can just on the below, there's a little button. You can press Q&A and put in some questions, or in the chat box. Okay. We have our first question. It reads, what are some ways one could find a mentor if they don't have one?
Okay, I'll repeat it. What are some ways to find a mentor if you don't have one? Something I will tell you, it's a secret I discovered about my mentors. I thought they were really doing me a favor. But what I realized is being interested in them was doing them a favor. Because a number of my mentors, they were not just smart, they had wisdom about life. And a lot of people in their current lives didn't care about their wisdom. So one of the ways you could find a mentor, and here's also a way, and I call this how to win friends and influence famous people. A lot of these people that you might want to reach out to write books. And I will tell you something, as someone who has written 9 books, I will read the reviews because I want to learn how to make the book better. I want to fix what's bad about it. But sometimes I'll see hundreds of reviews, but I won't see a video review. And I can tell you, if you go and find someone and there's many reviews and there's no video review, you can be the first one to write a video review. And if you write a video review, here's what you say when you write it. First of all, read the book. And I know with my books, it really touches me when someone really gets what I'm trying to communicate to my readers. And one of the things that I really appreciate is if they do a video review, and when they're writing it, instead of being general, if they say, Dr. Goulston, I read your book, and on page 33, when you wrote about such and such, that really applied to me, and this is how I used it. And that's a much different review than someone, just saying, oh, it was wonderful and it changed my life. And that's fine too. But I can tell you, when someone says that, it's a much more powerful review. And if they're the only person who wrote a video review and did something like that, and then they found a way to reach me on my website, I would return their email. And so that's just one way of reaching people, but it's really on you to reach them. And it's up to you to take the initiative, because the mentor is probably not going to reach out to you. And then what you really want to do is establish a relationship with them. And as I said, the more that you can tap into what they're really trying to communicate to readers or listeners or other people, the more they're going to feel appreciative that you really got where they're coming from. And there's a good chance that they will communicate with you. And then again, you can be very polite and you can say, I've never had a mentor, but and I know your time is precious, but would I be able to check in with you, whatever time you had, because I'd love to have a mentor and I'd love to have you be my mentor. So that's just one suggestion. Another question?
Thank you, Dr. Goulston. Yes, one more question. Adriana asks, how do you deal with your depression? Your life in medical school sounds like mine at the moment.
I think what I didn't do is I didn't reach out for help because there was such a stigma. But if you're going through medical school, first of all, you need to realize that depression and anxiety and burnout is widespread. So one of the things I would do is I would do a search online for burnout, chat rooms, places to focus, because I'll tell you what happens when you start to share what you're going through with someone else who's sharing it. And here's just a little bit of neuroscience, and I can get away with it because this is different brains. This has some neurological stuff going on. And see, what happens is when we're depressed and we're stressed, our cortisol goes up. Cortisol is a stress hormone that readies our body to deal with it. But when the stress gets too much, it starts to become distress and it's tough to focus. That's what happened to me in medical school. The depression got so great that instead of being stressed and still being able to focus with difficulty, it crossed over into distress. And my focus was, how do I relieve the pain? And what happens is when that happens, the distress starts to trigger something in our brains called an amygdala. And an amygdala is a part of our brain that causes the blood flow in our brain to go from our upper thinking brain, where we can focus and we can function, to our lower brain, which is all about survival. And that's called an amygdala hijack. And something I didn't know, but which I'm preaching everywhere, is yes, it's good to meditate. Yes, it's good to do mindfulness. And that increases your endorphins. And endorphins is our sense of well-being. And that can sort of help the cortisol. But what really helps it is oxytocin. And oxytocin is bonding to others. Many of you have had that feeling of oxytocin. If you're not feeling too good and someone that you know, without without soliciting it, they notice that you're not feeling too good. And they ask you with total kindness, are you okay? And you may shy away. No, I'm fine. And if they persist and they say, I don't know if you're fine. You look different. You look like you're going through something. What's happening? And when someone gives you kindness like that, and they ask you a few questions, you start to cry with relief. And what's happening is you're feeling oxytocin. So I would say, I think it's Adriana, go reach out. You will find groups. And as they begin to share and you begin to share, you're all going to be bathed in oxytocin. And the oxytocin is going to lessen your high cortisol. And your blood flow is going to go back to your upper brain, so you'll be able to function. Now, that said, I'm not saying don't seek out a therapist or someone to talk to, but reach out to people who are going through it, because one of the issues for a number of people is that when you're going through something and you talk to someone who isn't, inside we often say, well, it's easy for you to say what you're saying. You're not going through the depression. So that would be my suggestion, Adriana, and you're going to get through it. You are. Next question.
Thank you, Dr. Goulston. Speaking of, since you brought up de-stressing, we have one more question. Bring that up. It reads, do you think your de-stress exercise would help with trauma as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the de-stress exercise, and the slides will be available to you, is because, and I'll tell you what happens, because what do we talk about in Why Cope When You Can Heal? We actually come up with, I hate to use the word, a 12 phases emotional algorithm. And what's an algorithm? It's something where step by step by step by step, you go through things. And I'll tell you a little bit about it, but you can find out more if you get Why Cope When You Can Heal. If you're a healthcare worker or first responder, and you were in the heart of the COVID pandemic, what happens is, and you see horrendous things, you go through this experience, and I'll just give you a few of the steps, where you're traumatized by what you see because you're horrified. So trauma happens, and the horror is you see something that is beyond awful that you can imagine. And you barely get through it, but you're well trained. And then when you get away from it and you go home, you start to feel terrified, because while you're away from it, you start reliving it. And then the terror crosses over into feeling fragile. I don't know that I can go back and face it again. But because you're duty bound, this is what happens to military, because you're duty bound and you're dedicated to your colleagues and they're dedicated to you, you somehow, instead of going into panic, which is where fragile leads you, what happens is there's a huge surge of adrenaline. And adrenaline insulates us from physical pain and psychological and emotional pain temporarily. An NBA player can play on a fractured leg because of all the adrenaline. And what happens is, if you're a healthcare worker or you're a traumatized person and you have no choice but you have to go back, is when the adrenaline surges, it enables you to push away your thoughts and push down your feelings. And so what happens is, you don't think you can make it through a shift, and voila, you've just made it through 48 hours. And here's the analogy. The adrenaline is surging because of all the danger you feel, and that horror and that terror. What happens is, it's like a screaming alley cat, and you lock it in a cellar. That's what the adrenaline allows you to do. And then there's another screaming alley cat in your head. You lock that in the cellar, and then 5 more, and then 10 more, and then 50 more. And what's happening is you're functioning every day because that adrenaline is insulating you from those horrifying and terrifying thoughts and feelings. But then when the danger passes, the adrenaline goes away. And as the insulation goes away, it feels as if all those cats want to come out and just rip through that door and just rip you apart. That's what happens to military veterans. They're not in a war zone. Why would they come back and feel like they can't take it anymore? And 20 to 22 of them tragically end their life. They're not in a war zone. That's because not being in a war zone, the adrenaline is gone, and all the horrific and terrifying things they saw and felt feel like they're going to invade them. They don't even know why it didn't take them down the first time. And one of the things I've been trying to do, but I've given up on it, is I've been trying to rename post-traumatic stress into what people experience. And the experience is re-traumatization avoidance. Re-traumatization avoidance. And we write about that in Why Cope When You Can Heal, because when you've been traumatized, and when I talk to people who've been severely traumatized, not just by COVID, but maybe childhood violence, rape, molestation, bankruptcy. When I was telling people that we were writing this book, Why Cope When You Can Heal, especially the women, they start to cry. And I said, what are you crying about? And they say, if only. And I say, if only what? They said, if only I could heal. And I said, what do you mean? They said, I'm not the same. The trauma changed something in me. I'm not the same. I'm tentative. I never fully relax. I don't know peace. I know exhaustion. I have fun. I don't know joy. And one of the reasons they don't relax is because when you ask them, do you think you could go through it again? The people I ask, they say, absolutely not. I don't know why it didn't take me down the first time. And so they're always on guard because they're afraid that if they are re-traumatized by clearly remembering their thoughts and feelings, it'll take them down the second time. And so what we've organized based on Why Cope When You Can Heal is putting together groups of people who have gone through a similar trauma and having them walk through all the steps. What was the first moment you felt horror? When did you feel terrified? And as they're talking, we help them breathe through the steps. We may have them use a de-stress exercise. You imagine your mentor telling you it'll be okay. It's not happening again. You're just rethinking the thoughts you pushed away, and you're re-feeling the feelings that you pushed down. You'll be okay. And then what happens is we walk them and talk them through those feelings, and they experience them, and then they heal from the inside out. And that's why we call it surgical empathy. So I hope you could track with that. And if that's of interest to you, I hope you'll check out Why Cope When You Can Heal.
Thank you, Dr. Goulston. We have time for one more question, and it reads, what does someone have to do to believe in themselves?
You know, it's interesting you bring that up. I wish I could be one of those people who, when you have these affirmations that they work, they don't work for me. I couldn't, if I say to myself, you're really a good person, I don't believe it. If someone says, you know, you've really achieved a lot, I don't believe it. I mean, if I say that to myself. But if you can think of people who believed in you, and they're not just saying it because they have to, if you can pick anybody who's ever believed in you in your life. See, I can accept from any of my dead mentors, and I call it the Dead Mentors Club. I don't mean to make fun of it, but there's 8 and they've all passed away. I will allow any of them to talk me through it. And I will tell you, if you say, I don't have anyone like that, all you have to do is listen to some of the inspiring stories from some of your favorite athletes. And I am telling you, if you could reach them, and you might be able to, you could say, you know, you don't know me, But when you told me what you got through, I imagined you telling me I could get through it. And I just want to tell you, LeBron, Steph, uh, you don't know me, but you saved my life. And I'm rooting for you. You could do that, but allow yourself to take it in. And I will tell you this, I don't know you who just wrote this, but everyone who is on this call right now, if we open up, they would all say, we all believe in you. And you need to take that in because it's true.
Thank you to Dr. Mark Goulston for that great presentation, and thanks to all of you for attending. We will be sharing links and contact information in the chat box and on the screen. That's it for today's episode. From everyone here at Different Brains, have a good night.